Our reading this morning comes to us in midstream of the story. We heard the beginning of this story 2 weeks ago, albeit from Luke, but the three synoptic Gospels tell basically the same story. In all three, this section begins with the disciples or bystanders admiring the temple in Jerusalem, and then Jesus telling them that the temple will be destroyed. It's a dire prediction, and one that had already been fulfilled when the gospel writers penned their stories. What we read today is Jesus' answer to the disciples' questions. Tell us, when will this be? And what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? And Jesus surprises them. He tells them that no one, including himself, knows when that day will be. He does say that life will be pretty normal when it happens, eating and drinking, marrying and getting married. The normal functions of society will be intact. And he goes on to tell the disciples not when it may happen, but that it could happen at any time, just like a thief in the night. He tells them this not to keep them in a state of terror, far from it. He tells them this so that they understand the urgency of staying active in their assigned ministry in spreading the gospel. Many had come along and hijacked the hopes of Israel, hopes that we see outlined in our reading from Isaiah this morning. But they hijacked those hopes and turned the great day of the Lord into a scare tactic. And Jesus, throughout this discourse, is diffusing this tendency. Over and over he says, "See that you are not alarmed," or some variation on that theme. It's interesting to me that modern dispensationalists use this very passage to talk about a rapture. The idea that Jesus will come and temporarily remove the church before things get really bad. You've probably heard of the Left Behind series. This is one of the passages of Scripture from where that idea is taken. The problem with the premise of the Left Behind series is we as Christians throughout the Gospels are called to wakefulness and endurance. We're never promised escape from tribulation. In fact, the church's mission is to faithfully endure tribulation, to be salt and light in an unsavory and dark world. Last February, Wynn and I were invited to the home of the Johnstone Burts. We were there taking a course on the Diocese of London, and we were treated like family by them, invited into their kitchen for wine and refreshments before dinner. We all sat around a formidable kitchen table, a huge piece of oak furniture that was ennobled by scorch marks and deep cuts in the wood. Wynn asked Rachel about the table, and she recounted an amazing story for us. The table had belonged to the single sisters of the 4th Marquess of Salisbury. Lord Salisbury had been part of 2 parliamentary deputations which had raised the alarm to the Prime Minister that the rearmament of the British forces was dangerously slow in face of the growing threat from Nazi Germany. Armed with this insider family information and hearing of war and rumors of war, the 2 sisters of the Marquess decided they should leave London. So they packed up their belongings, including that kitchen table, and moved to their family home in Sussex, out in the country, safe from the bombing targets in London. When the first bomb was dropped on British soil, it did not hit London. It hit a farmhouse in the Sussex countryside, killing both sisters and leaving a scorched table to tell their tale. The sisters did exactly what we all want to do. They did exactly what the disciples wanted to do. Tell us, Jesus, when will all this be so that we will know to escape? And the answer comes back, you won't know. Only the Father knows that. Not even angels know. Why wouldn't Jesus tell them? Give them some insider information to escape the coming doom. He didn't tell them because the church has never been called and will never be called out of facing trials and tribulations. In fact, just the opposite. We're called to live in the midst of it. Now, I was raised on the idea that one day Jesus, when he couldn't take the evils of the world any longer, would peel back the eastern sky and ride in on his white horse and snatch his bride, the church, out of the world, rescue us and take us to heaven. And as a child, I of course wanted this to happen at the most advantageous times for me. Before a big test, when I hadn't done my homework, or before a baseball game that I knew we would lose. And as liberal Christians, it's easy to be judgmental, if not condescendingly bemused, about literal interpretations of the second coming, complete with missing people and reanimated bodies. But think about this. How many of us wanted to escape, wanted to pack our bags and move to a safer place on November 9th? It's the exact same kind of thinking. And the problem with this escapism is that it is contrary to the gospel. Jesus never calls us out of trouble. We're called to be salt and light in the midst of it. And salt is only good where things are unsavory. And light is of value only as it illumines the dark. I remember some years ago the ordination of the 7th Bishop of Upper South Carolina, Dorsey Henderson. Dorsey had apparently found an old retired Southern bishop, dusted him off a bit, and asked him to preach his ordination. The retired bishop was funny and charming, as almost all of us Southerners are. He was full of quaint sayings and vivid metaphor. I don't believe you can ordain a Southern bishop without a few quaint sayings in the proceeding. And in his sermon, he began to tell the bishop-elect about the work he was getting himself into. He told him how hard it was to lead a diocese, how labor-intensive and emotionally exhausting the work could be. And he said, Dorsey, there will be many times you want to escape and run, if not quit altogether. But he said, my advice to you is, hunker down like a mule in a snowstorm and plow on. That advice is not just for bishops. All of the baptized have the same ministry, the ministry of spreading the good news of Jesus. As that great line in the hymn, Come Labor On, says, claim the high calling angels cannot share. Too young and old the gospel gladness bear. But as high of a calling as it is, it's also a ministry that is labor intensive and often emotionally exhausting. We look around and see other Christians hijacking the good news and making from it a scare tactic or a message of exclusion. And then we have a hard time even calling ourselves Christians. I notice that we oftentimes add a disclaimer. I'm Christian, but I'm Episcopalian. Sometimes we want to escape the name altogether, and we say Episcopalian and just leave it at that. But we can't. We cannot leave the message of unconditional love and acceptance to hate mongers. We cannot move away to a utopia and escape all of our fears and anxieties. Jesus calls us to lean into them, even when we want to escape or be rescued. Jesus never promises that it will be easy, but as we hunker down and face into this life, he does promise, "I will be with you always."